Today I'll be talking about Sylvanus Olympio, the first president of Togo, a small country in West Africa, which was once a German colony and later became a French and British protectorate. The story of Togo is a little bit like that of Cameroon, which was once a German colony but was later divided between France and Great Britain as protectorates. Sylvanus Olympio, the first president of the Republic of Togo, was distinguished for his pragmatism, brilliance, and moderation. His government was overthrown by the first military coup in tropical Africa, and he was assassinated by Eyadema Gnassingbe. He came from the important Olympio family, which included his uncle Octaviano Olympio, one of the richest people in Togo in the early 1900s. Sylvanus Olympio was born on 6 September 1902 in Kapandu, in the German protectorate of Togoland, present-day Volta region of Ghana. His early education was at the German Catholic school in Lomé, which his uncle Octaviano had built for the Society for the Divine Word. Following that, he began study at the London School of Economics, where he studied economics. Upon graduation, he worked for Unilever, first in Nigeria and then in the Gold Coast. By 1929, he was located to be the head of Unilever operations in Togoland. In 1938, he remained in Lomé, but was promoted to become the general manager of the United Africa companies, then part of Unilever, operations throughout Africa. During World War II, the colony came under the control of the Vichy France government, which treated the Olympio family with general suspicion because of their ties to the British. Olympio was arrested in 1942 and held under constant surveillance in the remote city of Djougou in French Dahomey. The imprisonment would permanently change his view toward the French, and he would become active in pushing for independence of Togo at the end of the war. After World War II, Olympio became prominent in efforts for independence of Togo. His 1947 petition to the Trusteeship Council was the first petition for resolution of grievances taken to the United Nations. He founded the Comité de l'Unité Togolaise, CUT, which became the major party opposing French control over Togo. Olympio's party boycotted most of the elections during the 1950s within Togo because of the heavy French involvement in the elections. In 1954, Olympio was arrested by the French authorities and his right to vote and run for office were suspended. However, his petitions to the Trusteeship Council led to the 1958 elections, where French control over the elections were limited, although involvement remained significant, and his party won the 1958 elections. Olympio's CUT party was able to win every elected position in the National Council. The French were then forced to restore Olympio's right to hold office, and he became the first prime minister of the Togo colony and began pressing for independence. From 1958 until 1961, Olympio served as the Prime Minister of Togo and also served as the Minister of Finance, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Minister of Justice for the colony. He connected with many of the other independence struggles throughout the continent, for example, making Ahmed Sékou Touré, first president of Guinea, conseiller special to his government in 1960. In 1961, as part of the transition of power away from French control, the country voted for a president and affirmed the constitution developed by Olympio and his party. Olympio defeated his closest rival, Grunitzky, who happened to be his brother-in-law, with over 90% of the vote to become the first president of Togo, and the constitution was approved. During his presidency, Olympio tried to unite and educate the people about their new nation and the needs for development. It was said that he used to ride a bike from villages to villages, talking to people in their languages and educating them about politics, development, and patriotism, at a time when there was no radio in most places. During Olympio's presidency, Ghana and Togo had a big rivalry. The first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, and Olympio were initially allies working together to gain independence for their neighboring countries. However, the two leaders split when fighting over the western part of the German colony, which had become part of the British Gold Coast and eventually part of Ghana. The division resulted in splitting up the land of the Yu people. Nkrumah proposed openly that Togo and Ghana dissolve the colonial borders and unite, while Olympio sought to have the eastern part of the German colony returned to Togo. Olympio believed that the Yu people should be reunited under one flag. The relationship became quite tense, with Olympio referring to Nkrumah as a black imperialist, and Nkrumah repeatedly threatening Olympio's government. Relations between the two countries became very tense after 1961, with multiple assassination attempts against each leader, resulting in accusations against the other leader, and domestic repression leading to refugees receiving support from the other country. In 1961, Kwame Nkrumah warned Olympio of dangerous international consequences if the support for dissidents to his rule that were living in Togo did not cease, but Olympio largely ignored the threat. Domestic politics was largely defined by Olympio's efforts to restrain spending and develop his country without being reliant on outside support and repression of opposition parties. Olympio, an economist, realized that Togo, small in size and poor in resources, had to proceed cautiously in its development program. His austere spending was most significant in the realm of military policy. Initially, Olympio had pushed for Togo to have no military when it achieved independence, but with threats from Kwame Nkrumah being a concern, he agreed to a small military, only about 250 soldiers. However, an increasing number of French troops began returning to their homes in Togo and were not provided enlistment in the limited Togolese military because of its small size. The leaders in the Togo military repeatedly tried to get Olympio to increase funding and enlist more of the ex-French army troops returning to the country, but he refused. On 24 September 1962, Olympio rejected the personal plea by Etienne Eyadema, a sergeant in the French military, to join the Togolese military. At the same time, Togo largely became a one-party state during Olympio's presidency. Following a 1961 unsuccessful attempt on Olympio's life in which Grunitzky's Togolese Progress Party and the Juvento movement were accused, the opposition was outlawed and the leader of the Juvento movement, Antoine Miachi, was imprisoned for a brief period before being exiled, and other opposition leaders left the country. The result was that Olympio maintained a significant amount of authority and his party dominated political life. Sylvanus Olympio barely had a chance to execute anything politically. He was assassinated in a military coup in the US Embassy compound in Lome in 1963, 2 years after Togo's independence and his investiture as president. Shortly after midnight on Sunday, January 13, 1963, armed men attacked the presidential residence. Sylvanus and his wife were already in bed. The residence was only guarded by 2 policemen. The presidential palace was just next to the US Embassy in Lome. As the assailants talked among themselves and then took several minutes to break down the heavy front door, the Olympio had time to put on a pair of shorts and a shirt, go downstairs barefoot, climb out a window, cross the garden and climb the wall between his home and the US Embassy. Once there, he knocked at the door of the embassy to seek refuge, but unfortunately the embassy was closed. He found a Buick car parked in the gravel yard and climbed in. Meanwhile, the assailants burst into the presidential villa, went upstairs, fired point blank into the closets, and demanded to know where Olympio was. Hours later, the American ambassador comes back to the US Embassy's compound and finds Olympio in the car, who explains everything. The ambassador claimed not to have the keys to open the door and asked him to wait while he would go find the keys. Olympic was found in the car and gunned down. It was the first coup d'etat in the French and British colonies in Africa that achieved independence in the 1950s and 1960s, and Olympio is remembered as the first president to be assassinated during a military coup in Africa. In the days that followed, Eyadema, who would claim power in 1967 and remain in office until 2005, claimed to have personally fired the shot that killed Olympio while Olympio tried to escape. Who killed Sylvanus Olympio? When Olympio took refuge in the American embassy, the Putschis did not enter the diplomatic compound. Several hours later, they did not hesitate. Most importantly, who told the assailants where Olympio was hiding? It is said that then US Ambassador Léon B. Poulada received a phone call from the French ambassador Henri Mazoyer, who warned him that night that a coup was underway and that the Olympio might have taken refuge at his embassy. Incredible, but true. And it is believed that was the time the American ambassador went to the US Embassy's compound and found Olympio in the car. The American ambassador then returned to his residence and called his French counterpart, who then contacted the gunmen and sent them to the American compound. But why would the French want to get rid of Sylvanus Olympio here? Are some of the reasons the French initially treated Olympio with significant hostility during the transition to independence, and later, after Olympio became the president in 1961. The French became concerned that Olympio was largely aligned with British and American interests. Olympio adopted a unique position for early independent African leaders of former French territories. Although he tried to rely on little foreign aid, when necessary, he relied on German aid rather than French aid. He was not part of the alliances between France and their ex-colonies, notably not joining the African and Malagasy Union, and fostered connections with former British colonies, namely Nigeria and the United States. For the French advisor on African affairs at the time, Jacques Foccart, Olympio was the prototype of the surreptitiously anti-French head of state. Olympio inspired distrust in Foccart because he was elusive. Just after independence in May 1960, Olympio said, "I will do my best to ensure my country can thrive without France." In early 1963, Olympio even considered leaving the franc zone, CFA, and creating a Togolese currency. Olympio wanted Togo to be economically independent of France, which included developing a currency for Togo rather than relying on the CFA franc. Olympio would not live long enough to truly implement his vision for Togo, however. Gnassingbe Eyadema, who claimed to have personally fired the shot that killed Olympio, was a former soldier in the French colonial army. Eyadema came to power in 1967 after staging a second coup and remained in office until his death in 2005, after which he was immediately succeeded by his son, Faure Gnassingbe. Many wonder what Togo would have become under Olympio, someone with such love, brilliance, and vision for his country. No one will ever know.